Hi everyone, welcome to chapter 10. This is done in two separate PowerPoints. This first one is about emotional and social development. The second is about maltreatment and ACEs. All right. So, this is not our first time talking about Erickson, right? So remember when we first introduced him and we talked about how his psychosocial theory talked about experiencing psychosocial conflicts every stage. So that conflict is kind of like a meshing between the psycho and the social. The psycho is the child, the social is the environment, their relationships, right? So if those two are in harmony, the child more than likely goes through to develop that psychological positive quality. If not, they fail to develop the positive and may have a more negative outcome, which again will then affect them in the next stage. So how do the psycho and the social interact? Is it positive? Is it negative? That's going to determine the outcome. So here's our third stage now for Erickson, initiative versus guilt. So remember those earlier stages. The positive outcomes were trust, autonomy, and now the ability to show initiative, eagerness for responsibility, the ability to be a leader and not a follower. And play helps them try out those skills, right? They can pretend to be a parent or a teacher or do different responsibilities. They typically will act out things that are highly visible to them, and it's essential for adults to confirm their initiative. Even when it's something small, or we see it as small, that's something big for that child, and that's going to encourage that child to continue to take initiative as they move forward. Now, what were the negative outcomes from Erickson's first two stages? Mistrust and shame and doubt. Well, now it's guilt, right? So again, the important thing to connect to is typically their social environment. So are they getting a lot of threats, criticism, punishment? Or are they not even being given the chance to do things on their own and to become responsible, right? Some parents or caregivers kind of step in and do things for the child or don't think the child is doing it well enough by criticizing them and then does it for them in exchange, right? So the saddest thing, again, at 3 to 6 years old, kind of that preschool age, is that children at this age could come to believe that what they want to do is always wrong. I can't do it right. Every time I try to do something, mom or dad or whoever tells me it's wrong, and then they just start giving up. We don't want children to give up. They're young, they have a lot more life to live, a lot more things to accomplish. So, instilling initiative, again, has a lot to do with the caregivers. Are you confirming them? Are you supporting them? Again, if the child says, I want to go do the dishes, are you like, great, I've been waiting for you to take that responsibility and go leave them alone? No, right? There's knives and glass. So you want to still make sure that it's appropriate in terms of their initiative, but sometimes you may need to support that as their caregiver. All right, so now let's talk about the emotional part of this early childhood, right? Erickson believes it's 3 to 6. Piaget believes it's about 2 to 6 or 7. But again, if we think about preschool age children, they're gaining their emotional competence. Well, with that comes a lot of different factors. Self-esteem plays into that, how they self-regulate, their ability to show empathy, even aggression. And then friendships and parenting have a strong influence on how they deal with things emotionally, right? So we're going to look at all of the items in red on their own slides. So first of all, self-esteem is judgments we make about our own worth. And again, as children especially get school age, they start to judge themselves in comparison to other children. What they have, their ability to learn, their physical abilities, their appearance. They look at, again, a lot of different factors. And then what comes into that too is, are they able to make friends? Are they able to get along with their parents? Which again, a lot of these things they don't have a lot of control over at this young age, but it affects their initiative. Your self-esteem starts at a young age and starts to affect how eager you are to help or take on responsibility. Now, self-regulation, again, as children get older, they can use language more to explain how they're feeling. But again, when they're young, 2, 3, they might not have that language yet. So self-regulation, again, is modeled by caregivers and others in their lives. How do we deal with things when maybe it's not going exactly as planned, or we get stressed, or we get tired, or something positive happens? Again, regulating those emotions. You don't want to get too excited and you don't want to get too low. So again, we want to help children and maybe sometimes just shift their attention to something else and show them, look, it's not too big of a deal. We're now moving on to this, or getting deeper into, how they're feeling and using that language in order for them to understand and then start to process those emotions. Okay, so empathy and sympathy, if you don't know the difference, empathy is feeling empathetic because you've gone through something similar. You can relate to what someone else is going through, whereas sympathy is still being compassionate and caring, but maybe not having gone through the same experience. So when we act in these ways, it's with no expected reward for themselves. And again, that's very difficult with egocentric children who are kind of seeing from their own perspective. But when you have a hard time self-regulating, that empathy for others can actually lead to personal distress because you're providing something to others that maybe you're not receiving yourself. Um, and development of empathy is again promoted by a positive temperament, which children are born with their temperament, but also their relationships with their caregivers. And do they feel secure? And can they develop that compassion for others or feelings of understanding? So again, they're starting to occur at this preschool age, and many times they need adult guidance in feeling these emotions. Okay, so aggression is also normal at this age. Here's 4 types of aggression that are mentioned in our textbook: instrumental, reactive, relational, and bullying. So instrumental is aimed at gaining something. You want a toy, you want a certain place in the line that someone else has. And they find that this actually increases from age 2 to 6 as children become more attached, more egocentric, and it's pretty normal. Reactive aggression is an impulse for feeling hurt. Again, whether it was intentional or accidental, and it can be verbal or physical reaction. And this tends to indicate that they're lacking emotional regulation. It's typical in really young children. A 5-year-old maybe will stop and think before reacting. And if they don't, again, that may be a sign that they're struggling with their emotional regulation. Relational aggression are non-physical acts like insults or rejecting others socially aimed at harming that social connection. And it's really antisocial. It can be hurtful. It's more common as children become aware of groups and differences. So again, that's something you want to look out for as a caregiver. And then bullying is unprovoked. It can be physical or verbal. It's especially on those who are unlikely to be able to defend themselves. And again, typically referred to as the victim versus the bully. Um, in both sides, you can see signs of poor emotional regulation in both victims and bullies. And that's interesting to consider is they're both struggling, but yet again, the experience is very different for both sides. They say we should definitely be intervening as soon as possible, preschool age, school age, as soon as we see it occurring. So bullying will be discussed a little bit more in chapter 13. Okay, what about their social experience, right? Parents have a big role in that because they can label and explain, I see that you're sad, you're crying, or I see you're happy, you have a big smile on your face. And right, we can show them warmth and enthusiasm and concern and engage in discussions about their emotions. Now, this is the first time I think we start to talk about friendships, but we see this discussion coming up throughout middle childhood, throughout adolescence. But at this age, it's very foundational. It's very much about liking something similar, doing a similar activity. And that's why friendships can change frequently at this age. You go to play again in the sandbox and there's different children there, and the child you were playing with or you were friends with the day before has moved on. So unless you move on, you might start to form different friendships, right? They find that children who are friends are more emotionally expressive. Again, they start to build that trust with each other. And when they start to form those peer relationships, it can positively contribute to their academic performance. Now, there are variations in peer sociability depending on culture, and that depends on, again, whether you kind of grew up in a more collectivist society or a more individualistic and autonomous society. But they find that children who come from more village or tribal cultures use more interpretive play, where they really reflect on roles and experiences because their life has a lot of experience. Whereas industrialized or urban cultures, like the US, it's more inventive play where we make believe and it doesn't necessarily connect to experiences children have had hands on. It could be from movies and, other types of influences. Now, again, when we make new if you see children making new friends at a young age, it kind of predicts how well they're going to do cooperatively in the kindergarten classroom, right? And what they find is the socially competent preschools start to excel over their less socially skilled peers, and kindergarten programs that promote, sensitive teachers and small group sizes, good ratios, developmentally appropriate, tend to also promote social competence in those children. Okay, so more about play and friendships and interacting. Mildred Parton in 1932 came up with some different categories of play. So first she looked at the peer social ability of play. So there's solitary or non-social play, and then there's social play. So here, if we're looking at this diagram, we see non-social activity, and there's three types of play listed there: unoccupied, onlooker, and solitary play. Now, unoccupied play is seeming to just do something randomly and not really engage in it, maybe kicking a ball once and then just walking off. Onlooker behavior is children looking on to other children playing. It could be shy children, it could be new children to the classroom. And then solitary play, playing alone. Now, the next three types of play start to become more social. Parallel play is when children play near each other but don't interact. So they might sit near each other, be playing with their own objects, but start that social connection by being near. Associative play starts to engage a little bit more. They might still be doing their own activities, but maybe they're sharing toys or each drawing their own picture, but I'll share markers with you, or just talking to each other. And cooperative play is when they work towards a common goal. Let's play firemen and do that, and they're both engaged on the same goal and the same play behavior. Now, Mildred Parton also looked at the cognitive play theory categories and kind of looks at, depending on your age, what are you maybe able to do in terms of play? So functional play is very common with birth to two, infants and toddlers, where they do simple movements with or without objects, kicking their leg over and over, or, you know, shaking a rattle over and over. It's meeting a function. They're starting to understand what that object does. Constructive play is typically seen around 3 to 6 years old, and that's creating or constructing something, whether it's a picture, making a building. Again, children go out and seek, completing a project, and that is constructive play. Now, make believe and sociodramatic play are very similar. Make believe play is acting out either everyday roles or imaginative roles. So 2 to 6 year olds engage in this play. But make believe play tends to be more individualistic. It's not really involving others. But once they do start to join with others and be more cooperative in their play, then it can also be sociodramatic, right? Where you're the mom, I'm the dad, let's both engage together on this make believe play. So both of those are common at this age grouping. Now, lastly, for this chapter is the role of the parent. And as we've been raising our virtual children, you've been kind of seeing the influence of your parenting style. Well, if you think about it, you are your virtual child's first role model, right? You're making the decisions, you're influencing how your child will relate with others, and specifically through your style of discipline. So, how do we directly influence children through our parenting? Well, maybe we arrange peer activities. That's taking initiative to form social groupings for our children and have that social connection. Encouraging children to be a good host, encouraging children to share. That's very direct teaching through your parenting. Offering guidance on how to act. And again, through their child rearing style is a very direct way that they will influence their children. Now, what are indirect influences? Well, whether your attachment is secure or insecure, that's not really something you think about or go about designing, but it happens. And that indirectly starts to influence how your child relates to others. Um, do you positively interact with your child through conversations and play? Again, through just who you are as a person? Are you modeling good interaction? And again, indirectly through our child parenting or rearing style, we may not even know it, but decisions we're making are indirectly influencing our child and who they become. So here are some other styles of discipline, right? We've been talking about parenting styles. Well, inductive discipline is seen as more positive. Parents listen to their children, they're understanding, and they're consistent. And again, that can many times go along with the authoritative parent. Now, what is deductive discipline? It's when rules are created and then enforced, and teachers do the same thing with punishments and rewards, right? So you kind of set out to we're going to set these goals, and if they're not followed, we'll kind of go from there, rather than allowing things to happen and kind of setting rules as you go. Arbitrary is when it doesn't really seem clear of why the child is being punished, whether it's physical or verbal, putting them in timeouts, a spanking, and the child has a hard time relating it to any specific rule or standard. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to them and therefore probably does not lead to change. And then similar to our permissive parenting style, you might also follow a permissive discipline style where you have very few rules and few disciplinary practices. Now, again, we've heard of Baumrind. She came up with these styles in 1971. And again, here are those 4 styles. Now, this chart kind of breaks it down rather nicely of how accepting are these parents, how involved, how much control do they exhibit, and how much do they encourage their children to be autonomous. So again, that authoritative parent is typically the parent we're aiming to be, where we're highly accepting, but we're also highly involved. We adapt our control, depending on our child's age. And again, it's moderate. It's not a lot of um, control. It's again just trying to assist the child and encouraging them age appropriately to be independent. The authoritarian parent, I always think of like a dictator, dictarian. I know that's not a word, but that's how I remember. So they're low in their acceptance, they're low in their involvement. But on the other end, they're highly strict and can be physical even in their control. So they don't really encourage their child to be independent because they want them to follow their rules and not really question it. Permissive parents are on the other spectrum. So they're highly accepting, but sometimes either too lowly involved or too highly involved. Too lowly involved is, asking a parent, "Oh, where's your son? He's in second grade now, right?" "Oh yeah, he gets his way home every day. I don't worry about him. He'll be home in a few hours." And again, not really knowing where their child is at that young age. What about too highly involved? Could be a parent. Someone asks, "Oh, what's your teenager doing this weekend?" "Oh, we're going to a party together. It's run by some high schoolers and there'll be some drinking." Yeah, that's too highly involved as a parent, right? So their control is typically very low. It's rarely seen as even controlling. And that's where the relationship kind of blends. Who's the parent? Who's the child? And again, a lot of encouragement of independence. And then that uninvolved parent is just not really involved. So they're not accepting, they're not involved, they're not controlling, they're indifferent. They're probably not very much involved in the child's life. Okay, so why do we need positive discipline? Why are we aiming towards that authoritative parenting? Because what we find is when we use transgressions as an opportunity to teach, children really learn from what's happening and it can be applied. So, a fight occurs between two children. We can use that moment to help them with the skills to resolve that conflict. And by doing that, that shows the child's skills for reducing, instances later on. Provide a reason for your rules, right? That gives them a connection, that cause and effect. Allow them to be participant in your family routines and chores and duties. Try compromising, problem solving. Encourage them to be mature, but also be sensitive to their unique needs. All right, please follow this with the maltreatment and ACEs PowerPoint. Thank you guys. Have a great week.